Welcome to Life Stories. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who once swore they'd stand by you forever. Imagine raising someone, protecting them through every heartbreak, only to watch them slowly drift into a glittering world where you and the person you love most no longer fit. This isn't just about an invitation that never arrived. It's about a sister forced to choose between loyalty and appearances, and a mother who refused to let her daughter believe she was unworthy. What happens when family love collides head-on with pride, class, and the seductive pull of status? And how far would you go to protect the bond that matters most? The story you're about to hear will test what you believe about family, sacrifice, and the cost of standing your ground. The invitation was heavy in my hands, the kind of thick, creamy cardstock that whispered money before you even read the gold-foiled words. My name, Melissa Grace Carter, was written in elegant cursive across the front, a wax seal stamped with two intertwining letters glinting under the kitchen light. It should have been a moment of pure joy. My younger sister Brittany was getting married at the Grand Wellington, the kind of Chicago hotel you only see in glossy bridal magazines. But as my eyes skimmed the bottom line, my breath caught. Melissa Carter and guest. No mention of my daughter. No mention of Chloe. At first, I thought it was an oversight. Brittany and I had been close my entire life. Me, the protective older sister. Her, the fiery redhead with a knack for trouble and charm in equal measure. I had stood by her through every milestone, from scraped knees to college graduation. She'd been at my side during my whirlwind marriage to Daniel, had held my hand through the long nights of my complicated pregnancy. When Chloe was born, Brittany was the first to hold her after me, tears streaming down her face as she whispered promises into my newborn's ear. That kind of bond didn't just vanish, or so I thought. When I called Brittany, her voice was warm at first, until I brought up Chloe. "Melissa, I'm sorry, but the wedding is adults only. No one under 18, she said, the way you might tell a child they couldn't bring their dog into a store. I reminded her Chloe was 15, mature, perfectly capable of handling herself. But Brittany's tone cooled, and when I heard Brandon's voice in the background, a low murmur I couldn't quite make out, her words became firmer, almost rehearsed. "It's not up for discussion." The line went dead not long after. I sat there, staring at my phone, the echo of her voice still in my ears. Chloe was in the living room, laughing at some YouTube video, completely unaware that her aunt, her hero, had just decided she wasn't good enough to witness one of the most important days of her life. I knew I'd have to tell her, but how do you explain that kind of rejection to someone who still believes family is forever? Brittany hadn't always been like this. Before Brandon, she was Saturday morning pancakes and sweatpants, cheap wine on the couch while we gossiped about work, spontaneous road trips to Lake Michigan, with Chloe in the back seat singing off-key to Taylor Swift. But Brandon came from a different world, a Lake Forest childhood, Ivy League credentials, an investment banking career that practically minted money. He had a face made for Wall Street and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. In his orbit, Brittany's jeans gave way to tailored dresses, her weekends to charity galas. Slowly, our calls became fewer, the baking days with Chloe replaced by European vacations I only saw on Instagram. When Chloe finally learned about the wedding, she smiled and said she understood, but I saw her eyes shimmer before she turned away. Later that night, I found the blue dress she'd bought with her babysitting money hanging in her closet, the tag still on. She'd been saving it for that day. That was when I decided I wasn't going to the wedding either. Not if my daughter wasn't welcome. The fallout was swift. My mother accused me of being dramatic. My father urged me to be the bigger person. Extended family chimed in with words like selfish and jealous. I could have caved, swallowed my pride for the sake of keeping the peace. But it wasn't about pride. It was about showing Chloe that love doesn't come with conditions, that being family means standing together, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. Months passed, the tension lingering like smoke after a fire. Then came December, and with it, my mother's plea for us to join the annual Christmas Eve dinner. Everyone will be there, she said, the implication hanging in the air. Everyone meant Brittany and Brandon. I told her I'd only come if Chloe was treated with respect, if Brittany acknowledged the hurt she'd caused. My mother sighed, the kind of sigh that says you're exhausting her. Melissa, it's Christmas. Can't you just let it go? I almost didn't go. But Chloe, my resilient, big-hearted girl, said she missed her aunt. So we went, armed with a carefully wrapped gift I'd spent weeks making. A leather-bound photo album filled with moments Brittany had once treasured. Her first steps with me holding her hands, the two of us in matching dresses, her beaming as she held newborn Chloe, flower-dusted afternoons in our tiny kitchen. The last page was the wedding invitation, centered beneath one handwritten line. Family means no one gets left behind. Dinner was as stiff as the linen napkins. Brandon's parents sat at the head of the table, their polite smiles tight as purse strings. Brandon himself raised a toast midway through, announcing their new Lake Tahoe vacation home for adult gatherings, his eyes flicking toward Chloe like a reminder she didn't belong. I felt Chloe's hand tense in mine under the table. When it came time for gifts, Brittany unwrapped ours slowly, her fingers lingering on the leather. As she turned the pages, her posture shifted, the perfect society wife mask slipping. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. His parents exchanged looks. The room grew quiet, the air thick with something unspoken. When she reached the last page, her eyes glossed with unshed tears. For a moment, she looked like my sister again, the one who used to crash on my couch and dream out loud about the life we'd build side by side. She asked Chloe to come sit with her, and together they turned through the photos again, laughing softly at shared memories. Brandon's jaw tightened, but Brittany didn't care. Later, she pulled me into my father's study, closing the door behind her. She admitted things hadn't been what they seemed, that Brandon's world came with rules she'd never anticipated, rules that had cost her pieces of herself she hadn't realized she'd given up. And then, quietly, almost as if she were afraid the words might shatter if spoken too loudly, she told me she wasn't sure she wanted to pay that price anymore. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and keeping peace in your family? What would you do if someone you trusted completely started to become a stranger before your eyes? Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about Chloe's place at a wedding. It was about whether Brittany was ready to fight her way back to who she truly was, and whether I was ready to help her do it. The day after Christmas, my phone buzzed before sunrise. It was a text from Brittany. Can we meet for coffee today? Just us. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if this was an olive branch or a trap. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. She showed up in jeans, a plain sweater, no flawless blowout, no diamond studs. Just Brittany, the Brittany I remembered. She wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee like she needed its warmth for more than just the cold. I couldn't stop thinking about that album, she began, and Chloe's face when I asked her to lunch. Her voice trembled, but there was resolve in it. Melissa, I've been living in someone else's world, and in doing that, I've been erasing pieces of mine. I listened as she explained how the night after Christmas Eve had spiraled into an argument with Brandon. He called the album emotional manipulation, said it was low class to dredge up the past. He demanded she choose, him and his version of her, or us. She admitted she'd slept in the guest room, the space feeling colder than the Chicago winter outside. I told him I'm having lunch with Chloe next week, she said, whether he likes it or not, and I told him I'm not cutting my family out anymore. My chest tightened. This was the sister I had been waiting for, but the fight she was stepping into was dangerous, the kind of slow, corrosive conflict that could shatter her marriage or her spirit. Over the following weeks, there were small changes. Brittany and Chloe had their lunch, then another. Brandon didn't like it, but he didn't stop her. She began showing up to Sunday dinners again, sometimes with Brandon, sometimes without. But the undercurrent of tension was always there, invisible but potent, like an electrical charge in the air before a storm. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. One Friday night, Brittany called, her voice ragged. Can I come over? Minutes later, She stood in my living room with a suitcase in one hand and a folder in the other. I'm staying here for a few days, she said before I could ask. She set the folder on my coffee table. It was filled with bank statements, credit card bills, and a prenup I didn't know existed. Melissa, she said, I think Brandon's been hiding money from me. A lot of it. She explained how she'd stumbled onto a second bank account under his name, one he hadn't disclosed. Money had been moving in and out in large sums, with withdrawals she couldn't trace. When she'd confronted him, he brushed it off, called her paranoid, told her not to embarrass herself with wild theories. But she'd seen enough to know something was wrong. My mind raced. This wasn't just about family politics anymore. This was about trust, security, and whether the life she'd been living was built on lies. And if Brandon was lying about money, what else was he lying about? Brittany slumped onto the couch, rubbing her temples. I don't even know who he is anymore. Part of me wants to confront him again. Part of me is terrified of what I'll find. I sat beside her, torn between wanting to protect her and knowing she had to face this herself. The thought of Brandon's cold, dismissive smile when he spoke about my unsophisticated family made me want to burn his perfect little world to the ground. But this wasn't my fight to start. It was hers. That night, as she unpacked her suitcase in my guest room, Chloe hovered in the doorway. Are you okay, Aunt Brittany? She asked quietly. Brittany managed a smile. I am now, kiddo. But when Chloe walked away, I saw the cracks in her expression. Over the next 2 days, Brittany stayed with us. We cooked together, watched movies, laughed like we hadn't in years. But every so often, she'd drift off, staring at nothing, her mind clearly somewhere else. On Sunday evening, she told me she was going back to talk to Brandon. I need answers, she said, and I can't get them hiding here. I wanted to tell her not to go, that he'd twist things, make her doubt herself again. But I knew Brittany. When she decided to face something, she faced it head on. She hugged me tightly before she left, whispering, "Thank you for reminding me who I am." The house felt different after she was gone. Quieter, heavier. I didn't know if she'd call me that night, the next week, or not at all. But something in my gut told me this was just the beginning, and the fight ahead would test everything. Our bond, her marriage, and the fragile bridge we just started to rebuild. What would you do if someone you love discovered a secret that could shatter their life? Would you push them to confront it or protect them from the truth, even if it meant living a lie? Because when Brittany walked back into that house, I had no idea whether she'd be returning with the truth or with nothing left of the life she thought she had. Brittany didn't call that night or the next. I tried to focus on work, on Chloe's school projects, on anything that would keep my mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. But by the third evening, when the phone finally rang, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Can you come over?" she asked. "I can't be here alone." I drove to her house in record time, my stomach in knots. The Tahoe property brochure I'd seen over Christmas still sat on the kitchen counter, but the place felt different now, colder, hollow, as if the walls themselves knew something had cracked. She was sitting on the living room sofa, still in the clothes she must have worn all day, her makeup smudged. "I confronted him," she said. "He admitted it. The account is real. The money isn't just his, it's mine too. My inheritance from Dad. He moved it without telling me." My breath caught. Our father's money wasn't much by Brandon's standards, but it was sacred, earned over decades, saved for his daughters. "Why?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She looked down at her hands. "He said he was managing it better than I would, that I wouldn't understand investment strategies." Her laugh was bitter, as if my life is some hobby he's in charge of funding. I could see it then, the deep fracture in her marriage, one that wasn't going to be fixed by counseling or polite compromises. "Melissa," she said, her eyes meeting mine for the first time, "I'm leaving him." She explained how, after their fight, he tried to smooth things over, offering her a weekend trip to Napa, a new bracelet, gifts that felt more like distractions than apologies. But the more he talked, the more she realized she'd been living as a curated version of herself, stripped of the people and values that had once grounded her. I stayed because I thought leaving meant failure, she whispered. But staying feels like disappearing. She spent the next 2 weeks quietly moving her personal belongings to a storage unit. Brandon didn't notice or pretended not to until the morning she told him she was done. That night she showed up at my door again, suitcase in hand, but this time there was something different in her expression. Not fear, not hesitation, freedom. In the months that followed, she rented a small townhouse not far from mine. It wasn't the sprawling estate she'd shared with Brandon, but it was hers. Chloe started spending Saturdays there again, baking cookies like they used to, the sound of their laughter filling the space. And slowly, Brittany began to reclaim the pieces of her life she'd given up. There were moments of grief, finding a dress she'd worn to one of Brandon's galas and realizing it had never really felt like hers, or seeing their wedding photos and recognizing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But there was also joy, like when she and Chloe surprised me with a backyard dinner for my birthday, string lights hanging from the fence, music drifting into the warm night air. One afternoon in late spring, Brittany invited me and Chloe to spend the weekend at Lake Tahoe. She'd rented a small cabin, nothing like the vacation home she and Brandon had once boasted about, but it sat right on the water. On the second evening, we stood on the dock, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Brittany slipped her arm through mine. "You know," she said softly, "I think this is the happiest I've been in years. No pretense, no performance, just..." Chloe, sitting at the edge of the dock with her feet in the water, looked back at us and smiled in that way teenagers rarely do, unguarded, pure. "Best weekend ever," she said. And in that moment, I realized the wedding, the arguments, the heartbreak, it had all led us here. A version of family that wasn't perfect, but was real. Brandon's name faded from our conversations over time, though every now and then I'd catch Brittany looking off into the distance, as if she were measuring the cost of what she'd lost against the weight of what she'd regained. But she never looked regretful. If anything, she looked lighter. On the anniversary of the day the wedding invitation arrived, Brittany came over for dinner. After dessert, she pulled out a wrapped package and handed it to me. Inside was a leather-bound album, much like the one I'd given her, but this one held photos from the past year, her new home, Chloe's school play, Sunday dinners, that weekend in Tahoe. On the last page was a picture of the three of us on the dock, arms around each other, hair windblown, faces unfiltered and laughing. Beneath it, she'd written, "Family means no one gets left behind, ever." My throat tightened as I closed the book. The woman sitting across from me was no longer the sister I'd been afraid of losing. She was the sister who had fought her way back, not just to us, but to herself. And in the quiet that followed, I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes the greatest love you can give someone is the courage to walk away from the life they thought they wanted and toward the one they truly need. What did this story make you feel the most? Anger, hope, sadness, or something else entirely? Comment 100 if you love this story. Where are you watching from? Share this video with friends who believe in the power of family. Thank you for watching Life Stories.